Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you. Good morning, Jenny.
Morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I was drawn to contact you by a news story that I saw earlier this year of, potentially a canoe having been found in northwest Wales, not too far from my stomping ground. In fact, frankly, Snowdonia is basically my spiritual homeland, at the very least. And I simply had to know more, about what was going on. So first of all, can you just introduce yourself, how and who you work for, and then we'll get into this Bronze Age canoe. Well, not literally, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I'm Jenny Emmett. I am the Senior Planning Archaeologist for Gwynedd Archaeological Planning Service.
Uh-huh.
I am the curator on the scheme. Gwynedd Archaeological Planning Service, or GAPS for short, is an autonomous section of Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, and we are the advisors to the local authorities of North West Wales, because they don't have in-house archaeologists.
Okay, cool. So does that mean that you get to wear very stylish clothes on site? You can just go out and buy some Gap gear, and you're good to go.
Yeah, we don't get branded. No. They're very keen on full PPE on this scheme.
I see. Fair enough. Well, and so they should be. So just starting at the beginning, then, this is part of a bypass, is it?
It is, yeah.
And so what's the context then for this discovery in that sense?
It's a 10-kilometre long bypass going around Carnarvon and the nearby village of Bontnewydd. It's been mooted for decades and is finally happening.
Right.
So construction works are in process at the moment, and there's been a state programme of archaeological work, and the possible canoe was discovered during the course of that mitigation work.
I see. And so is this just again, as someone who very much grew up in the area, is this hopefully going to release some of that traffic that piles through Carnarvon and past the castle and all that sort of thing? Is that part of the goal of it?
It is, but it's more to do with the traffic that builds up in Bontnewydd.
Right.
Yeah, particularly during holiday season, where there tend to be sort of quite long queues in rush hour and things.
Okay, cool. So in that sense, not necessarily a controversial scheme, which is always good to hear.
A lot of local support.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I suppose what happened then? How did you come across this, and how did you come to the conclusion that it might be a canoe?
We went through the normal stages of assessment and evaluation, and the burnt mound that it was found underneath was actually an upstanding feature, so it was identified early on as something that would need excavation before any construction work started.
Right. Okay.
And so it was in removal of the burnt mound material, then we found this unusually large trough underneath, sort of 3 meters long, quite narrow, sort of cut to fit this artefact, with a couple of smaller troughs nearby.
Okay.
And on exposure, it seemed to have the form of a possible canoe. It turns up at either end. It's the right kind of dimensions. It's not complete, so we can't be sure, but it does fit quite well with the few comparable examples there are. The earliest one at Mus Farm looks quite similar. So.
Okay. And so from what I gather, this is basically the first of its kind found in that part of the world. In terms of canoe or potential canoe, can you just describe to the folks at home, but also frankly myself, what this sort of feature is typically about? What do you think is going on the site in the Bronze Age?
Well, that's the big question. There are many theories. A burnt mound is essentially a waste product from an activity that is water. They're very common in the region. They're always found near fresh water. There is usually one or more troughs that are cut, which are usually lined with stone or timber or clay to make them watertight. There's then hearths that we find, and rocks were heated in the hearths, dumped in the water, heated up, and that caused the stone to fracture, and the burnt used stone to then discarded and over time form this mound. So experimental archaeology has established that they could be used for cooking large quantities of meat, brewing, for sort of routine things like washing. We don't find much environmental evidence or artefacts from it that would give us a clue as to what exactly was going on. And obviously we haven't got to the stage of environmental analysis with this project yet, so we don't know what specifically is happening at this site. But there was one long trough which contained this possible canoe, with two small troughs adjacent to it, which were timber plank lined.
Okay. So how big do these burnt mound features tend to be? Because I think I was imagining something probably larger than what this likely was.
It's just quite a large one. We get a range between, like 4 meters long up to sort of 20 or more meters long. They can. It's not always clear. We have tried quite hard in recent cases to establish whether they represent multiple events or a long continuous period of usage or repeat, but it's quite hard because the material is quite homogeneous, so it's really hard to identify phasing within that.
I see. So in that sense, is it just local people using relatively local rocks at one or many different times over time? Yeah.
There is some element of selection of rocks, we think, as to what is most effective for conducting heat, and obviously find sort of larger quantities of poorer quality rock.
Okay, so in that sense, then, is there then an associated burning patch and element then? So where the rock is heated and then immediately dropped into water, then
you get multiple small walls. Actually,
right. Interesting. That's interesting. Would you ever put your feet in one to sort of warm up a little bit on a cold day if you had the chance, or?
Possibly.
Because I know that in other parts of Britain you get, especially for example in and around the Pennines, you get sort of hot rock kind of pools that people suggest could be almost like hot tubs that could be used for washing, but also when the rock cools down you might be able to get in and just relax a little bit. But presumably this isn't big enough by the sounds of it for you to actually sort of luxuriate in.
No, the small troughs certainly aren't there. They're only, I don't know, half a metre by half a metre square perhaps, so not really our size. But the one containing the possible canoe, you probably could. It'd be a bit of a tight squeeze, but yeah, you could.
Okay, like a little gold rush bath, that kind of Western tin bath. Yeah, okay. So what sort of scale then do you think people were working working here? If that means so was this a large community or a small community, or was it just the odd person perhaps doing this sort of work, or do you think it could have been something that people were almost like hot desking? They were coming to this spot at different times throughout a year, maybe or two.
Yeah, one of the difficulties is that you don't often find settlement evidence near burnt mounds, so it's very difficult to make that connection. In this particular location, there are Bronze Age funerary discoveries immediately to the north and immediately to the south, so there's clearly a corridor of activity going on, and there's possible Iron Age activity as well, so it could be over quite a long period of time, repeated visits. We've taken peat cores from the adjacent wetland, which will give us a bit more of an idea of the landscape and what type of activity was going on over what period.
Okay, and do you know roughly when you'll find out what the results of that is?
No, I mean, as I say, fieldwork's still ongoing. I would imagine, hoping it's going to be sometime sort of towards the back end of next year.
Okay, cool. So the canoe then, if it is a canoe, do you have any, or does anyone have any theories that they would want to hazard as to how it ended up being used as it's being used there? For example, I when I was working for the Archaeological Trust, they were digging at a place called Hungate, where the cellar of a house had clearly once been a boat. It had come from, I think, the Wessex region and had been repurposed. And is that possibly what we're looking at here? Is this a boat that maybe came to the end of its life and someone went, oh, that'll make a good trough? Or what do you reckon?
Yeah, that seems very likely. If it wasn't cut as a purpose-built sort of timber trough and then sunk into this pit, that is what our working theory is.
Okay.
It is currently at York Archaeological Trust. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Small world, small world. Well, good hands, definitely good hands to hand this stuff over to. So presumably then, is this now undergoing a process of preservation or sort of, I suppose, mitigating further damage to the find now that it's out of the ground?
It is, yeah. It's
Yeah.
been receiving emergency conservation stabilisation works pending analysis during the post-ex phase.
Okay, so that's the Bronze Age stuff, and it's sort of, as you say, it seems to be part of a corridor of activity. But I always, this is something that I love, but also find sometimes a little bit frustrating about prehistory, is this sense of you can talk in swathes and colours of activity, but you can't necessarily be specific, which is great for being creative about what you're finding and thinking about it. But I know certainly some historians, medieval historian friends, get very frustrated with prehistory for that purpose. But it looks as though also you've confirmed a Roman road as well between.
It is, yeah.
And this is so growing up as I did in northeast Wales. One of my bugbears was the fact that people really focus on the Romans, even though there's actually an awful lot more going on in North Wales. But this road here seemingly is quite important because it confirms a route between, is it Carnarvon and somewhere in the Conwy Valley?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. And was that, were people like, yay, we've confirmed it, or was it already kind of already known about and, meh?
It was a mixture really, because it was quite a faint earthwork. We had got it on LiDAR. As I said, there were various routes that had been considered, by various studies, and it was a kind of a satisfying thing to confirm that this was the one, particularly for Dave Hopewell from Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, who's done a lot of work on the Roman roads of North Wales.
Okay.
And it survived relatively well. There was a bit of plough damage, but to be able to expose 100 plus meters of real Roman road, it was really quite dramatic.
Yeah. Well, what sort of quality was it? Was the surface still intact?
The surface had been lost, but it was quite rough anyway. So it was a rural road. It was laid down quite quickly. We didn't have any associated ditches. Got a bit of saddle quern, I think, was the sole find, which was slightly disappointing. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Okay, cool. So a provincial Roman road.
Exactly.
And also some evidence of 8th century industrial activity. Now, this is also something that I find quite interesting. Who do you think was doing this industrial activity, and also what was the evidence that you found of that?
Well, this was one of the sites that was found during the evaluation, the trial. And so a series of intercutting pits that produced slag and hammerscale from the environmental samples.
So hammerscale is the sparks, isn't it?
It is.
Off blacksmith activity. It sort of sparks and then cools down on the ground. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And a couple of encircling ditches, and we think we found a kiln type feature during this phase of work. But again, we don't really get many artifacts. It's all in the environmental analysis. So at the moment we've got some discrete features associated with some sort of curvilinear ditches, possibly some structures. We think there's a settlement nearby that may or may not be contemporary, because the medieval phase around here is aceramic. So again, it's all in the dating. But that's as much as we can say. There are similar sites elsewhere in that bit of Gwynedd that are consistently early medieval, the same kind of small scale ironworking by local people. I guess there seems to be a bit of a trade network going on there. We can begin to find some patterns. We've got 3 or 4 similar sites now.
Okay. Well, I suppose the reason why I was intrigued by that element is that does this sort of underline a theme possibly for this site, in so much as this is a place where people do industrial or quasi-industrial activities away from where they live, potentially for safety reasons or for some other reason in terms of trade access. Is this basically the story of the site, that it is a place where people do things but not necessarily where they live?
No, we have found a couple of settlement sites as well, because it's such a long scheme, a landscape sway. It's hard to sort of generalise a particular theme for the whole route, but that does seem to be an activity. You get industrial activity slightly detached from settlement, as you say, for practical and safety reasons. Trend. But along this scheme we've got 8 or 9 burnt mounds, I think, at the last count, so hopefully we'll get a better picture of the kind of range of activities and dates.
Okay. So I suppose finally, I guess in that sense, or at least almost finally, what is this phase of archaeology ahead of or attached to this piece of civil engineering or road building actually doing for the story of of North Wales or North West Wales in particular? Is it filling in any particular blanks, or is it helping to shore up an already fairly well understood narrative?
All of those. It is this particular area was already predicted to be quite archaeologically rich and diverse because it's good agricultural land, lowlands, good access to the sea, and quite a lot of river corridors. That was already regarded as quite high potential, and we did have quite a good sprinkling of known archaeological sites of most periods.
Okay.
So it's kind of building on that, but at the same time, things like early medieval archaeology and sort of prehistoric funerary remains are in themselves relatively rare of the type that we've got. So it is, and of course the canoe is an exceptional discovery. So it is adding some quality data, if you see what I mean, and improving the general richness of the record. Really, in terms of development. Management for going forward, it's really valuable to have a better idea of the potential in that area.
Okay, interesting. So this has been a good opportunity to take a sample, as it were, across that section of land. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as you say, it is an exceptional discovery, but you could also say that the canoe is a awesome discovery.
Yes.
No, thank you very much for your time this morning. It has been a pleasure. Is there anything, just before I let you go, is there anything in particular that you would want people who aren't from the area, who aren't familiar with the history of the area, to take away from the story of North Wales? Is there something in particular that's interesting archaeologically or historically that you think people should pay more attention to?
It's very difficult to focus on one thing in particular. There is in that bit of North West Wales, there's a continuity of activity, sort of despite Roman presence, I guess, throughout sort of later prehistory through to the medieval period, and the fact that there is much more there than we know about. The historic environment record presents a really good overview, but it's being added to all the time, and we're increasingly finding that in greenfield land, there's a high chance of finding something of interest, really, of significance.
Okay, cool. Well, just adding to that then, during your time working in Gwynedd, then, have you had any particularly interesting finds or any sort of monuments or moments that come to mind as something that again that's like a take-home kind of ooh.
I think that's very subject to personal taste. For me, it's always most exciting if you're archaeology being the study of people through their material remains. When you find human remains, that for me is the most exciting thing. And so we've had a couple of years ago, we found a lot of early medieval cemeteries, and that's really useful as in characterising the population of the region at that time.
Right, and sorry, you've led me to ask you another question. How does that characterise it? What is the character that comes out of those cemeteries?
They're still undergoing analysis, but we already know that there's a huge variation in burial rite and in religious traditions at the time.
Okay.
And because we have very acidic soils, we don't get remains surviving very often.
No.
So to have a few sizable examples in that way, we're going to get quite a lot of information quite quickly.
Okay, interesting. So a slightly confused and interesting population, very much like the one I'm familiar with. Thank you again for your time this morning. It has been a pleasure. If it's okay, if anything particularly interesting comes back from the preservation of the canoe, can I possibly get back in touch with you again?
Yes,
have another chat? Okay, cool. Right. Well, thank you again, and until next time. Bye bye. Take care.